just one quick advertisement from the side of the Analytics Club. If you enjoy events like this, we always need people, of course, to organize it and help us with events like Hack for Good, Data Fund, and so on in the next semesters as well. So if you're interested, you can just send a message to any one of us that has an ACE background. That's the easiest way to spot us. And then we're really looking forward to do something with you. And now, without too much further ado, I would just tell you what's going on today. So first of all, we have about 15 minutes by Alex's introduction into applying for a PhD, the ETH AI Center, then 15 minutes from Yannick about applying for a position in industry. And afterwards, we're going to jump over into another kind of software, which is called WonderMe, which will allow you to switch between the talking circles quite easily, so you can have a more personal Q&A that's also not going to be recorded afterwards. And so you can really talk to Yannick, for example, about your personal CV, or you can talk about PhD applications with Alex. So it's a more personal and tailored experience afterwards. So that's it pretty much. And since both of the speakers are pretty much well known by now, I guess, from the flyer, I would just hand over to Alex to start. And I'm looking forward to a great presentation and talk afterwards. Cool. And thank you, of course, for joining us.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for inviting me here and giving the opportunity to talk. Yeah, so I don't have slides to present, but I wanted to share a few experiences for those who don't know me. So I originally studied computational linguistics and computer science. Then already during the studies, I had a first startup, but I had no idea how to make money with this. So I just did project after project to finance my life. Then I worked for a company a couple of years in the Apple software industry. For the first time, then I understood how to make money with software. So this was really great. Then I did a PhD at ETH, and at the last year of my PhD, I was at MIT in the US. And there I was so excited by the startup scene that when I came back to Switzerland, I co-founded the ETH spin-off Dakuda, which is focused on real-time computer vision. In between, I also became assistant professor in University of St. Gallen in the business area, which I didn't study, but I had the luck of lecturing around various levels, bachelor, master, executive MBA. I finished also my habilitation in the University of St. Gallen, and I successfully sold my company to Magic Leap, where I took then over in building up the team here in Switzerland from 15 to 70 people with the offices in Zurich and in Lausanne. And then I decided this summer to leave Magic Leap and go back to ETH for the opportunity of the ETH AI Center. Because one thing that I always saw and observed was there's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of great ideas. You know, Switzerland is always #1 in innovativeness and so on, but we don't have the tech companies here, right? And also the biggest companies in Switzerland, you know, they are all not very digital yet. So there's a huge opportunity, right? So I'm an entrepreneur by heart. So I see always opportunity where maybe other people are seeing problems. But I used the PhD also to find a little bit of where could the journey go. And so coming now to this, like when and why should you do a PhD? So there are various reasons. One of them is simply because once you have a PhD, typically you're better off financially. Like you get a higher salary, you make bigger jumps, and so on. So you're distinguished in a way that helps you also advancing in an industry career, right? The other part is, which I appreciated the most, is that you have a high degree of freedom, right? And this is probably the hardest thing from a student to a PhD, that during the studies you always get which courses do you want to choose, what do you pick here, and so on. And suddenly when you start your PhD, you're getting into the field, you're super motivated, then you start reading stuff, then you realize, oh my God, everything is already done, right? And so you're going through up and downs, and you need to learn quite a lot on how to self-organize, right? So this is something which also strongly develops you further. But of course, that's something which you need to consider. Like if you're not open for that learning experience, then maybe something more guided as a career progression is better. But I think it's a great part, and you get responsibility for your own research projects. You can mentor then also students on bachelor, on master level. So for me, it was always like a big opportunity to learn more in a specific field, but also learn more about myself and growing from that part. I do think that industry, startup, and entrepreneurship are all things that are very interesting. So I wouldn't say one is better than another one. You simply need to find out what fits your preference. What's your motivational anchor, right? So the entrepreneurship side has many benefits. So I was motivated by the way of driving my own things even further than I did in the PhD, right? For a PhD, you still need to write papers. If you're not into writing, then maybe a PhD is not something, because that's one of the key elements that you will be doing as well. So of course, you're thinking about new ways of solving problems and finding new approaches, but you also need to spend some time also writing and presenting it. Again, there's no good or bad. I think writing has at least helped me to sharpen the way of thinking, because if someone asks you, hey, can you please write that down? You suddenly realize the things that you don't know. So you're becoming way more structured and focused, and understand also where there are gaps. So this is what I'm seeing. What I'm trying also to do with the ETH AI Center, because it was something that I really liked, but I self-organized, and I had a strong preference for entrepreneurship also before. I'm also trying to open up now ways on being entrepreneurially active during your PhD, that you make experiences in that in a safe environment without having, for instance, the financial risk yet. And also a common thing is that people towards the end of the PhD are doing more and more an internship in industry. So you keep the options open. So you can, of course, continue a career in academia. If you have the publication track record, then you can also go to industry or to the startup world. So I see the benefits on that side, but it's something that is a journey that you're committing to. So if you're not open to commit for, depends on the field, but usually it's 3.5 years or 4 years. If you cannot commit to such a part, then I would not recommend starting this journey. Good. I think later we do some more interactive parts, or do you want to also take some questions through the chat or something like here?
If you already want to take 1 or 2 questions, we can do that now, and then jump to Yannick after that. And afterwards, of course, we have the big split where we can use Wonder Me, and everybody can ask as many questions they want. So are there any?
Because there was around the motivation part. Why should you do it? I talk a little bit more than about the application part and how to apply successfully, but there was on the motivation side. So I don't know if there are any questions on this or comments. You can.
If anyone has a question, you can just raise your hand.
Yeah, something like this.
Otherwise, you can also ask it afterwards without it being recorded. If you're
that's another plus.
Less shy afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is I think on the general motivation part, and then the question is, okay, if you have decided that's something that you want to do, how do you find the right fit for you? And I think there are a number of things, some which are really focused on foundations of topics, some of them which are on the application areas, which are completely different games. And one of the things that we're trying as a new area to establish with the program focus is really also the co-evolution of foundations and impact areas. For instance, to solve some of the problems in the medical field with machine learning, you probably need also new foundations and new approaches for this. So we're trying to address this in the program, that by giving you 2 mentors, basically benefiting from day one, that we set it up with the best mentors from 2 fields, potentially also 2 departments, and also attracting people that are matching this. So when you're applying for something, read really what the program is about, because there are different areas. Some programs are there which want to enable you an exchange between 2 locations. there you need to do your homework, understanding what are the different areas of the two locations, and probably you need to also apply with a specific research proposal. So you need to spend more time preparing exactly on what could be something that's resonating there, and also maybe use your network to talk to people that have been in a program there and so on, and to learn more. If it's something that, like in our case, where we emphasize the interdisciplinary part, then make it easy also for the ones running the program to see what are the best things to match you with, right? So what are the strengths related to the areas that you're having there? And of course, you don't have most of the time like already a number of publications and so on, but it's important that you're providing a coherent picture and that your motivation is very clear. And wherever you can provide names that you have been either you think it's a good fit or you have been in touch with, I think that's also something that is useful to help during the process. In general, you depending on which position it is, but there are fellowship programs like the ones that we're offering. So we basically are a central point, and then we have in the AI Center, there are now 72 professors behind, where we are helping with the matchmaking across all 16 departments of ETH. And there are other programs where you're directly applying to one particular group. And this is something that you need to keep in mind. What are the different stages that the application process is running? And the good thing is you can, in most cases, read also how the application process runs. So it's published in the guidelines, so you can read who makes the selection, what is the selection timeline, what are the selection criteria. And the easier you make it, that it's clear that you're ticking the boxes and you're a good fit, they're more likely that you're getting invited. And getting invited after the screening is already a good sign, because this is then you're already at a further stage where it comes to interviews. Most of the time, the interviews are, it's good if there are interviews which are face-to-face, but we don't have that opportunity right now for most of the cases. So this is a little bit of a challenge. So how can you bring across like the personality that you're also representing? Because people also want to make sure that you're also fit from a social point of view, right? Try to find out a little bit how the group that you're potentially want to be part of also works, and think of ways of bringing this in. Yeah, so these are a few on the recommendations for that. Also, you can ask questions to the people running the programs. Like in our case, we also had a small Q&A session checking what are open points. And one thing which I also would recommend, especially if you're not in Switzerland yet, is also something understanding what is the payment part, because in Switzerland, PhDs are among the best paid PhDs in the world, if you're getting the highest PhD level, because there are countries where you need to make sure that you're keeping up your living costs. And yes, in Switzerland it's more expensive, but you're also getting the compensation. And at ETH, for instance, there are different compensation levels. You can look them up, but I think it increases each year. I think the lowest one is for the first year 45,000, and the highest one, this rate 5, is around 70,000. So it's a big difference. And depending on which field you're applying or to which area, it might be a different level. So it's also worth asking if you consider moving in that field. So in our example, for instance, we're paying the highest salary level in 100%. But this is also something that you should clarify, especially if you don't know how it works in that part, because you need to finance your living. Yeah, and overall, if you want to progress in your career, it's always good if you have spent some time also somewhere abroad. So if you're already coming to Switzerland and this is your abroad stay, then I think that's good. But if you have just been always at the same school, then maybe look for something where you get also the opportunity of spending at least some time in another country, because it widens the horizon and it also helps you in many ways. So this would be kind of like just a very rough impression on on the motivational part and also on the process, and would be more than happy to take any questions or tactic elements that you're curious about.
Perfect. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, afterwards in WonderMe we have the chance to you have the chance to ask whatever.
Perfect.
One quick reminder for you as well, because we have this week and not next week, because next week you have a deadline coming up with the PhD applications. If you just want to spend one more minute before we switch to Yannick for his intro, I guess that could also be an important deadline for people to know about.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So for the ETH AI Center, the deadline is on November 30. So it's coming up next week. Check it out. We want to encourage research on AI foundations, applications, and implications across all departments. It's a very interesting program. It's a new program, and see if this is a fit with you. And our website is ai.ethc.ch.
Perfect, and thanks. And then we're handing over to Yannick before we afterwards do the Q&A session.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Of course, I have slides because as a business representative, I need to have slides. So I will share my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. All right. So, I mean, first of all, I don't want to play the game of PhD versus industry, because I did both. I did the master's at ETH and then went to UC Berkeley to do my thesis there. I came back for the PhD. And after my PhD, then spent 5 years in machine learning and AI. I started off in finance and went into consultancy and ended up in pharma at the moment. But yeah, I'm at pharma, but I'm here as a private capacity. So I'm not in any way want to advertise my employer. But please also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I think especially if you're going in industry, it is important to be also represented on LinkedIn. It's nowadays it's quite standard to be there. So please feel free to reach out to me. Also, if you have questions after that on LinkedIn, it's always a good place. Depending on my workload, I might be able to answer faster or not so fast, but it's definitely good to connect. So before I'm going into like the process and what is important in applying for industry, I think it's good to start with the fundamental differences of AI in research and in commercial industry. And the first point that I wanted to make here is that, I mean, at the end of the day, the focus of private companies in the machine learning area follows the principle of ROI, the return of investment. So that's why I put Dagbert Duck there, because it's all about money at the end. And what I mean by that is that even starts with machine learning metrics when you design machine learning algorithms, because false negatives can have different price tags attached to it. So even like with very simple stuff, you can already see that there's differences when it comes to research and industry. Of course, also like development costs are crucial. Engineering costs are super relevant. I put that here, and there's this famous example of Netflix where they put a prize out for 1 million to make their recommendation system better. And the guy that won, the solution that won, it never made it into production, because the engineers, they were looking at the solution and they're like, well, if we implement that, that's going to cost a lot of money and it's going to take a lot of time. It's simply not worth it. So that's a funny story from Netflix that, you know, even though the solution would have been better, it was never implemented because of that was not the only one and not the only reason. So I put the link there. You can read about it. It's quite interesting. So I would say that the the best solution is the simple solution that is good enough from a business perspective. And I think this is a little bit conflicting with academia and research, because we're always after the best, and in industry it's good enough is what we're looking for. And I think for me in the beginning that was a bit of a shift in mindset that I had to get used to it. It's also that you have to think of machine learning in industry more as a data product. So it's not fire and forget, as it is in research sometimes. It's really that you have to build something robust, and that is also a different mentality. So I put that little two axes here of commercial versus research, machine learning complexity. And I personally started off in finance, as I said. This is heavily commercial. I think the machine learning complexity there was not so high. In contrast, there is Google research or Facebook research, which they're doing incredible complicated stuff. And Roche, for example, is a huge company where they have a bit of everything, so they're doing some drug research, which you do really cool stuff that is also very complex. Me personally, I'm in the area of Roche currently that is more commercial. So I just draw that little chart here because I think it's important to understand, if you choose a company, to understand where this company fits into this axis. And Alex mentioned like startups, which I think I will put them somewhere up here because they do really cool stuff, but they have the commercial pressure to be successful. So I think it's always interesting to think of the companies in that way, like how mature they are, what kind of crazy things they do in machine learning. Which brings me to the second bullet point here, the big one. That is also one of my learnings, that there's a lot of education still needed when it comes to machine learning. And that's where I have this little diagram here, which I like very much. It's choose your own data science adventure, because everybody is crying machine learning and AI in business. But if you ask them, like most of the times, simple data analytics is good enough, or even like simple statistics is good enough. So it's not always that we really need machine learning to solve the problems in business. It's just that it's very hype and people want to do it. But a lot of time I had to educate people and tell them, look, what you really want is just simple data analytics. And I think this is also something that you need to be ready to also educate the business, that actually you don't want machine learning, you want something else. So that is also an important aspect, because I think if you're in research, then you're with people that are really focusing on machine learning, and it's very highly complex, and in business it can be sometimes extremely simple. So this is the second slide in regards to like what are the differences. This drawing here is one of my favorite papers in the recent year by Scully from a Google paper, where they show like what is your actually machine learning code in comparison to other infrastructure that you need to put something in production. And at the end of the day, in industry, it's always about putting machine learning into production. So when I finished my PhD, I thought that the machine learning code is the most important aspect. And over the last 5-6 years, I realized it's just a little aspect that, of course, is important, but it's not the only thing that is important. So again, another thing is this really nice drawing of where fits machine learning in. It's really after you have a scalable, reliable engineering with great data collected, you can do proper data analytics, you can build proper data pipelines, you can build machine learning on top of that. And this is a slide from Google, and they really know. So I trust them. And this is another thing that a lot of businesses, they cannot get their basics right. So they were just want to jump into machine learning. And a lot of time I need to explain like this very basic principle. So my message here is that the business processes are super messy sometimes. Kaggle is not the real world. The business understanding is crucial if I want to solve something. So it's not about choosing the best algorithm. It's really feature engineering. How can I do the feature engineering from a business perspective, right? Productionalizing of ML is important because otherwise I would yield a negative ROI. Nobody wants that. Of course, in order to do that, engineering is key, and especially like if you have engineering skills paired with some cloud skills, I think then you're in high demand. I think a lot of this productionalization is happening in the cloud, so it's definitely good to have that. Just one slide on adopting your CV. So I think for industry, it's super important to highlight some practical relevance of the things you have been doing. So of course, it's nice to see your master thesis and your bachelor thesis, but it's more important to highlight why is that relevant and how is that practical. It's also important to do some background research on the company and some on the posting, and then adopt your CV. So I personally, like my CV, I did in LaTeX, and I commented out some aspects. I rewrote some parts, and then I just commented them out and adopting and compiling it for specific positions. So I think it's not feasible to have like one CV. I think it's important to have different versions of your CV ready for different kind of positions. Yeah, also, and I partially was mentioning it already, it's good to have some relevant projects that demonstrate your business understanding. And personally, I like LaTeX, but this is just very personal. I also like when there's a picture. I know that in the UK, US, you would not do that. I also like if somebody puts his GitHub link so I can go and check out the stuff that he or she has been doing. And also, I like a personal touch. So if you put hobbies, I think that's great. Maybe not like boring hobbies like swimming and reading, because everybody's doing that. But if you have some exciting hobbies that can start a conversation, I think that's always interesting to see that flavor in a CV. I quickly going to talk about the interview process that we created, and I was involved in hiring six data scientists this year. We had a 3-stage process with 3 interviews. So the first round was purely looking at the CV, and here, of course, HR is no big help. So I had to go through all the CVs. And as you can imagine, so that's roughly for one position, it was like 200 CVs because we were hiring internationally. So there were a lot of CVs. And to be honest with you, I spend more or less 1 minute per CV. So it's not that I, like take half an hour to go through the entire CV and check everything. It's like in the first round, I really, within 1 minute, I decide yes or no. And then the CV lands on either the pile of accepted for the further CV review or rejected. So it's also for the CV, it's like a stage process where in the first round, it's a bit superficial, but I'm just being super honest with you guys here. So yeah, it's very fast. I look at the CV. And after the CV round, if you made it, you get like a use case that you need to solve within 1 week. So it's basically a practical use case. And in our case, it was the people had to predict the time series. And well, actually, it was 3 products in 100 countries. So basically 300 time series predictions, 9 months ahead. And of course, as you can see, this is like a very open, an open task. So you have 1 week to do that, and it's quite interesting to see like the different approaches. There's also no right or wrong. When we assessed the use cases, it was mainly making sure we check that people understand what they were doing, and they were not just copying code from Stack Overflow or something. So it's a practical exercise where you can demonstrate your thinking, and that's what we use the use case for. It's for filtering in the first round, and then if people pass the first round, we invite them for a technical interview, and the technical interview is split up in those 6-7 parts. So one part about, it's just like 1 or 2 questions to neural networks, 1 or 2 questions about machine learning and sklearn. So in that area, that's why I put the picture here. One of the questions was like, what is the pipeline object in sklearn, and why is it important? Then some questions about software development, like what is polymorphism, for example, programming, applied statistics. It's really applied, so I'm not looking into theoretical questions. So, for example, one of the questions in applied statistics was like, how would you model, or what is the distribution of total number of goals scored in a football game? So we just want to understand like that people have a sound statistical knowledge. And then, of course, we also have a couple of questions into like infrastructure and communication and business. And then lastly, there's also a round with HR to check, like the cultural fit and communication and personality. So final remarks from my side. Yeah, I put that picture here on the top right, my first car, expectation versus reality. That was also a little bit my first job, to be honest. And that's why I put this diagram here. So stages of life versus math skills, where, like you do advanced calculus at the end of your master's or PhD, and then you start to work and it's only spreadsheets. And this was also exactly the case for my first job. So when I was joining finance industry, I did Excel for half a year. And it was a bit tough, to be honest. Like you come with this very high expectations, and you're going to change the world and do all these cool things that you learned at ETH. And then you're doing Excel files. But this is just, you have to push through that. And I'm just wanted to mention that I think it's important to have high expectations, but at the same time also that you be willing to go through that path. Another thing is the job interview versus the actual job. I mean, I've seen, and also in my network and colleagues, where like you get asked those really crazy interview questions, and it's all about CNN or RNNs. And then if you really look into what they're doing, it's linear regression, right? So then there I would also say that it's important to ask the right question in the interview from your side. So for example, one of the questions I personally always asked in the interviews was, how many machine learning algorithms do you have in production? Most of the time, the answer was quite surprising, because it was 0 or 1 or 2. So I think it's also important from your side, take the interview as an opportunity also to ask questions about the company, about where they are, about the maturity of the exact job, how it looks like. Also a good point, and I put the link here because I really enjoyed that article, is to avoid certain job postings. So for some jobs, I really would not apply, because from the postings itself, you can already see that they have no clue about machine learning. And if you apply there, it's just going to be a disaster. So I think it's also important to understand better this aspect. So I think sometimes you can save some time. Also, the real world, again, like it's a data jungle, so you will need to do a lot of data wrangling on your end. So it's not that you have some servants that provide you with the data that is perfectly fine. So that is also something that is important. And ultimately, I personally think it's a bit of a decision between the impact that you want to have and the problem complexity that you want to solve. So if you're going into industry, as I said, for me in finance, I think I had a huge impact in the company. I didn't, change the world with machine learning. I changed the world there with Excel. So I had a huge impact, but the problem complexity was very low. And unfortunately, those two things are most of the time a bit mutually exclusive, unless, and here again, I agree with Alex, maybe, startups can be an exception here.